We use these apps to find a connection, a quick spark in a sea of faces. We put our best foot forward, a carefully curated version of ourselves, and we hope the other person does the same. We share just enough to be interesting, but not enough to be vulnerable. It's a delicate balance. But what happens when the other person isn't playing by the rules? What happens when they see a version of you that you didn't even know existed? A version they've been studying long before you ever swiped right. I thought I was just going on a date. I didn't realize I was walking into a story that was already halfway written, and I was the unsuspecting main character. It started like so many of these things do. A night of aimless swiping, a quick match, and a conversation that was surprisingly easy. His name was Leo, and his profile was perfect. A clean, handsome face, a few photos of him hiking and playing with a dog, and a bio that was witty and charming. Our conversation flowed effortlessly from our mutual love of old movies to our favorite hiking trails. He seemed genuinely interested in what I had to say, and for the first time in a long time, I was excited. We agreed to meet for coffee at a busy cafe, a safe, public space for a first date. He was exactly as he appeared in his photo swarm, funny and engaging. We talked for hours, and I found myself opening up to him in a way I hadn't expected. The date ended with a simple hug and a promise to do it again. It was a perfect, textbook first date, but as I drove home, a small, unsettling detail from our conversation kept nagging at me. He had mentioned my dog, a specific, quirky detail about her that I had never put on my profile or anywhere on social media. I brushed it off, telling myself it was a coincidence, a common breed trait, but the unease lingered. The texts started almost immediately. They were thoughtful and kind, but the frequency was a little much. He would send a good morning message, a good night message, and several messages throughout the day, all of them sweet, all of them a little too personal. He'd ask how my day was, and then, without me telling him, he'd mention something about my work, a small detail I had only told my closest friends. I started to feel a prickling of fear, a sense that I was being watched. I mentioned the coincidence of the dog again, and he laughed it off, saying he must have a psychic connection to animals. It was a charming response, but I couldn't shake the feeling that he was just a little too good at playing the role. I started to notice other things. He would text me at the exact moment I was leaving the gym, or right as I was walking out of my favorite grocery store, a small, independent place that he couldn't have known I frequented. The messages were always about my well-being, always kind, but they were also a constant reminder that he knew where I was, what I was doing, and when I was doing it. I started to feel a profound sense of violation. I blocked his number, his profile, and all of his social media accounts, but the texts continued. They came from a different number, a burner phone, and the messages were no longer charming. They were short, terse, and tinged with a possessive menace. You can't get rid of me that easily. I just saw you go into your apartment. You forgot to turn off the porch light. I know you're trying to hide from me, but you'll never be able to. My heart would pound in my chest every time I heard a phone notification. I felt a desperate, suffocating fear that I was not alone. The world outside my apartment, the one that had once felt so safe and predictable, was now a hostile, terrifying place. Every car driving past my window was a potential threat, every text a confirmation of my worst fears. My friends told me to go to the police, but I felt a crippling fear of escalation, of making him angrier, of inviting him to do something more than just watch. The last night was the culmination of everything. I was home alone, the blinds drawn tight and the doors locked. I was trying to convince myself it was all in my head, a terrifying but ultimately harmless case of a bad date. A single notification from an unknown number buzzed on my phone. The message was a simple picture. It was a photo of a small, framed picture on my bedside table, a picture of my family. The photo was taken from inside my bedroom, and in the bottom corner of the photo, A familiar-looking hand was holding a single white rose, the same kind he had talked about giving me on our first date. The text below it simply read, "You forgot to lock the back door." My heart stopped. I was frozen, the phone falling from my trembling hands. I hadn't forgotten to lock the back door. I had checked every lock in the house just an hour before. I could hear a faint, shuffling sound from the back of the house, a slow, deliberate creak that was not my imagination. I didn't stay to see what he wanted. I didn't make a sound. I slipped out of my room, crept to the front door, and ran out into the street in a blind panic. I ran to a neighbor's house, pounding on their door, a hysterical wreck. The police found nothing, no signs of forced entry, no evidence of a break-in. But the back door was, in fact, unlocked, and the white rose was gone. I never went back to that apartment. I moved to a different city and started a new life, but the fear is still there. I deleted all my dating apps and all my social media, but I can never shake the feeling that the curated version of myself, the one I thought I was putting out there, was never the one he was looking at. He saw the real me, the one in my bedroom, in my car, in my life, and I know, with a cold, lasting dread, that the distance between us is a fragile thing, and a text message is all it takes to make it disappear. We all have a curated self we present to the world, a highlight reel of our best moments and most charming traits. On apps like Tinder, that curation is a necessity. You put your best photos forward, you craft a witty bio, you're building a person for someone else to discover. But what if the person on the other side isn't a person at all? What if they are just a collection of those curated selves, a mosaic of stolen details and borrowed personalities? Avoid wearing a human mask. I thought I had matched with a man named David. I learned, too late, that I had matched with a dozen of them, all in the body of one chilling entity. His profile was bland, almost generic. A few decent quality photos of a man with brown hair and a kind smile. His bio was short and simple, just looking for a good conversation and a new adventure. There was nothing specific to latch onto, which, for some reason, felt refreshingly normal. We matched, and the conversation was pleasant but unremarkable. A series of predictable questions and answers. We agreed to meet for a drink. The man who showed up at the bar was polite and attentive, but as the night wore on, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was subtly wrong. His hair was a different shade of brown than in his profile photo. His jawline was a little softer, and his eyes seemed to shift in color under the bar's dim lighting, from a light hazel to a darker brown. He talked about his love for indie rock bands, but his stories were vague, almost as if he was recalling facts from an article rather than personal memories. I dismissed it as nerves, or maybe just a bit of photo filter trickery, but the unease lingered like a bad taste in my mouth. We agreed to a second date. This time, the shifts were more pronounced. He showed up with a slightly different haircut, a new shirt, and a new story. He told me about growing up on a farm, a detail that was completely new and jarringly different from his previous story about growing up in a city. His voice had a slightly different cadence, and the way he held his hands when he talked was different. My mind began to race, trying to reconcile the person in front of me with the person I had met the previous week. I started to scrutinize his face, trying to find a consistency, a single feature that remained the same. But with every detail I focused on, another seemed to blur, a slight change in the curve of his nose or the spacing of his teeth. He seemed to notice my scrutiny and would smile, a practiced empty gesture that didn't reach his eyes. His conversation became a bizarre echo chamber, with him repeating phrases and even jokes I had heard from other people on the app, people I had gone on dates with months ago. I began to feel a profound sense of wrongness, as if he were a living patchwork quilt made of other people's lives. I went home and spent hours going through his profile again, zooming in on every photo. And that's when the truth hit me, a cold wave of terror that made my stomach churn. The photos, while all seemingly of the same person, were not. The first photo had a man with a thin, angular jaw. The second had a rounder face and a different chin. The third had a completely different eye color. He was a composite, a Frankenstein's monster of stolen digital identities. I went back through my old messages on Tinder, through my memory of other dates, and found a chilling connection. He had a joke from a guy I dated last year, a story about a family trip I had heard from a different guy just a few months ago, and a specific phrase about a love for the great outdoors that I had seen on dozens of different profiles. He wasn't a person with an identity. He was a collector, a mimic, a void that was trying to fill itself with the lives of others. The low digital hum from the sound design seemed to start in my head, a constant, buzzing static that was the soundtrack. To my panic, I received a text from him, but it was unlike any of his previous messages. The writing style was different, the grammar was perfect, and the message was a chillingly specific reference to a conversation I had with a completely different person. It was as if he had absorbed that person's entire persona, and now he was speaking through them. The distorted voice I heard in the beginning of the story began to echo in my mind, a cacophony of a dozen different voices all speaking at once, all of them saying my name. My terror built into a frantic obsession. I was so convinced that he was coming for me, that he was going to try to absorb my identity, that I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat. I started seeing his face in every crowd, a brief flicker of stolen features. His brown hair would suddenly have a streak of blonde, his eyes would be blue for a second, and then they'd be brown again. He was everywhere, and he was no one. He was a ghost in the machine, and I was next on his list. The climax came when I agreed to meet him one last time, an insane, desperate attempt to understand what he was. We met at a quiet park. He looked different again, with a slight goatee and a new jacket, but the vacant stare in his eyes was the same. "You know, don't you?" he said, his voice a chilling blend of a few different men I had met. "You've been looking for me." I confronted him then, my voice shaking with fear and rage. I told him he was a fake, a phantom, a collection of stolen lives, and then his face began to flicker. His features warped, his eyes changed color, his hair shifted from brown to blonde to black, and the skin on his face seemed to ripple like water. A terrible guttural chorus of different voices, all of them terrified, all of them screaming for help, burst from his throat. The distorted voice in my head became a deafening roar. He reached for me, his face a terrifying blur of every profile I had ever swiped right on, his hands a collage of a dozen different men. And in his eyes, I saw not a reflection of me, but a blank, empty void. I ran. I didn't look back. I deleted every dating app, every social media profile, but the image of his flickering face is burned into my mind forever. I can no longer trust my own memory or my own perception. I see his face in the crowd sometimes, a subtle flicker of stolen features, and the distorted voices in my head tell me he's still out there, still collecting. I didn't get absorbed, but I'm not whole either. He took a piece of my sanity, a piece of my trust, and he left me with a profound and lasting fear. I forever wonder how many faces I've seen on the app, how many voices I've heard, were not a person at all, but a fragment of a greater, more terrifying emptiness. A ghost in the machine that's always looking for a new match. We are all a series of moments, a collection of memories and feelings. On these apps, we capture a few of those moments and put them on display, hoping someone will find them beautiful. But what happens when someone doesn't just want to see those moments? What if they want to own them? to collect them, to curate them, and to turn them into something horrifying and new. I learned this the hard way, all because of a match with a man who wasn't just a photographer. He was an artist, and my life was his final project. His name was Alex, and his profile was a gallery. His photos were stunning, artistic shots of quiet, lonely places, an abandoned church, a single, dead flower on a windowsill, a staircase disappearing into shadow. His bio was short and simple. I capture moments. I find the beauty in the quiet. It was different, intriguing, and I was drawn in by the apathetic beauty of his work. We talked for days about his art, about the feeling he tried to evoke in his photos. He was kind, and his passion was infectious. He suggested our first date be a photo walk through a quiet, abandoned part of town, an old rail yard where he said the light was just right. It seemed like the perfect first date for a man who lived to capture beauty. But I didn't realize that the beauty he was looking for was mine. The date was wonderful. He was just as charming and soft-spoken in person as he was online. He took pictures of me laughing, of me looking into the distance, of me standing in the sun. He talked about capturing the soul, the small, unconscious details of a person that reveal their true nature. He was so focused on me, on my expressions, on the light in my eyes, that it was flattering, almost intoxicating. But there was a small, unsettling detail that kept nagging at me. As he was taking a photo of me from a distance, I saw his phone in his hand, and he was not just taking one photo, but a dozen, a quick, repetitive clicking that was almost a frenetic sound. I dismissed it as a photographer's habit, an artist in their element, but the sound of that clicking, a ghost in my memory, would return to haunt me. After the date, Alex sent me a link to an online album with a dozen photos of me. They were breathtaking. He had captured a vulnerability and a light in me that I didn't know I possessed. But as I scrolled through them, a chill went down my spine. There was one photo, a wide shot of me from behind, that showed a long, thin shadow on the wall next to me, a shape that was not my own. I looked at the photo, my heart pounding, and then looked at another, a close-up of my face, and noticed the shadow was gone. I told myself it was a trick of the light, a long, misplaced shadow from a tree or a pole. But the clicking sound from our date, the sound of a dozen photos being taken at once, began to play in my mind, a constant, low buzz that was the soundtrack to my burgeoning paranoia. Alex's texts and conversations became more and more about a project. He said he wanted to capture the whole picture, not just a few moments. He started asking for mundane details about my life, the kind of things that a boyfriend would ask, but he would ask them with an artist's detached curiosity. What color blanket do you sleep with? What does your kitchen look like in the morning? What book are you reading? He talked about wanting to finish the piece, and the phrase was unsettling, as if my life was a sculpture he was slowly molding. My paranoia grew. I started seeing things in my apartment that seemed to have been placed there for a photo. A single, dead rose in a vase, a book left open on a specific page, a shadow on a wall that was just a little too long. I would check the security on my apartment, but everything was always locked and secured. He wasn't breaking in, he was documenting a life I didn't know I was living, and he was making it into his art. The clicking sound became a constant in my mind, a rhythmic tapping that was the sound of my life being captured, one frame at a time. I tried to break it off. I told him I wasn't comfortable with his project, with the questions, with the feeling of being watched. His response was chilling. He didn't get angry. He sent me a link to a private online album. It was a single photo. It was a close-up of my face, my eyes wide with fear, a single tear running down my cheek. The photo was taken just moments before I had received his message, in my own living room, from an angle that could only have been from inside my apartment. The picture was an exact recreation of one of his earlier spaced artistic photos, the one with the dead flower butt. In this photo, I was the subject. and the dead flower was in a vase in my own living room, and the single tear was mine. The climax came that night. I was home alone, terrified, the clicking sound a deafening hammer in my head. I began searching my apartment frantically, looking for a camera, a device, anything, and that's when I found them. Not cameras, but photos. Dozens of them, meticulously staged and hidden in plain sight. Under my mattress, in a book, in my closet. Photos of me sleeping, of me eating, of me walking around my apartment. The photos weren't just of me. They were a story, a narrative he had created. They showed me looking sad, then happy, then terrified. They were a curated timeline of a life that wasn't mine, a life he had been capturing, and now recreating. The last photo was of me, right now, as I was looking at the horrifying discovery, my face pale and my eyes wide with terror. As I held the photo, my phone buzzed with a single text from Alex, the number a different one from before. "The project is complete," it read. "The story is finished." I don't know how he did it, or who he was. I just know that I ran from my home, leaving everything behind. I deleted my apps, my social media, my entire digital life. But the clicking sound of his camera, a ghost in my mind, is a constant reminder that my life is no longer just my own. It is an art project, a curated narrative that he finished and then left behind. The photos, the terror, the feeling of being a character in a story I didn't write, it all haunts me to this day. I still see his face in the crowd sometimes, a flash of brown hair and a kind smile, and I wonder what he's doing, what new project he's working on, and who he's watching now, carefully, quietly, one click at a time.